welcome all our guests, colleagues and valued partners, and specifically welcome tonight. I'm just going to, before Matt Christie runs the show, I'm just going to give you some insights from where Genii is headed and what we're up to and why we're spending so much money. You're part of a privileged team being part of central government. Whether you're aware of it or not, we have 3,500 clients geographically within New Zealand, yet most of that client base is led by central government. It is central government that devises, creates and puts in place the new models that the rest of the market buys. It is central government that thinks ahead of what the market can do and can contain itself to get these things to market and delivered. So you should be very proud of that fact, and we're very proud to be part of it. We're in the midst of a maturing AAS model, and it continues to provide increased uptake and increased outcomes and outputs. From a governance point of view, it removes the risk around continuing to buy assets and sweating those assets and then spending them on expensive contractors. Right? From a governance point of view for Treasury, it allows them to model and look at all public sector and say, we know how much you use, we know why you use it, and why is Department A using more than Department B? It produces a model that also allows them to benchmark with speed, also allows them to regulate how you buy and how you consume. But you've done that, and you've done that ahead of what we call a commercial or enterprise market, so you should be very proud of that. However, we see a new emerging model. It's a different model. It's a model that is created by individuals. When you look at your enterprise, it is nothing but a collection of very smart individuals. That model is even more challenging than the models we operate on today. The price per unit model, which most as-a-service constructs are, while they take away the operational burden and the readiness of supply, they are still price per unit model. We see a model emerging that is persona-based. It will take into account you as an individual, how you operate, where you operate, whether you're a contact centre agent or a social worker or an auditor. It'll be an emerging model that looks at you as an individual in an enterprise. It'll be a model that will be based on you accessing the cloud and using the connectivity that we've built. In Genii and Telecom, we've invested about $450 million this year. It is no mistake that we've put in place the largest service provider wireless network in New Zealand. It is no mistake that we've spent millions on our optical transfer network so we can backhaul from that wireless. It is no mistake that we continue to build large data centres. But when you think about those things and how we vertically integrate to individuals, then you think about the next model. And I think when we talk about that model and we talk about personas, what do you look like in that? Are you a mobile worker with just a cell phone? Are you a heavy data usage worker? Or are you a worker that's like me, only uses a piece of A4 paper? The challenge I'd put to you is it as a service that we're moving to now, or is it as a person and an individual? All right, so I'll leave you that thought as we move forward tonight. Matt, I'll introduce Matt Christie. Matt's our MC tonight. Please enjoy yourselves and please give us some robust feedback. We do welcome it, and I'll leave you with that final thought again. You do create this market. Whether you believe that or not, you absolutely do. So we're really pleased to have you here tonight. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Robin. So look, my name's Matt Christie. I'm the Business Manager for Government here at Genii, and I'm your MC for the evening. And for those of you that are good with initials, I'm actually MC all the time, but that's okay. So what is today about? Today really is about the digital future, and for us, we're looking to spark a conversation, and I had to slide that into the conversation. You know, the digital future is something we're all grappling with. It's not about the bits and bytes, it's about the challenges that the way we either sell our products or engage with citizens are delivered out there in the market. And that is what today is about. And to that end, we're really pleased to have three key speakers. So Richard Foy, who's the GM of Digital Transformation and Government at DIA. So thank you, Richard, for coming along. Ian Napoli from ISIS Group, you know, one of the leading consultants in the market, and obviously a big online presence as a blogger as well. So it's great to have Ian here. And our own Hayden McKee from Revera, who is also going to address us today. So the idea is that we provoke some questions, get a little bit of dialogue going, and then over networking and drinks we can talk through the issues of the day and see where we go from there. So thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. We're really looking forward to the sessions. And to that end, I'd like to introduce Richard Foy. So Richard, of course, has had a long career in both the private and most recently in the public sector, working with MSD, and now since about 2012 working with DIA on digital transformation, where he's now responsible as GM for the Real Me and Result Area 10 engagement with agencies and looking at how you engage in the digital future. So I'd like to introduce Richard. Welcome. He's only got one hand because he tried to save a goal, he tells me, and dislocated his thumb. So I'm sure he can drive technology. So over to you, Richard. Welcome.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga rōranga tina mā, tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora. I didn't try to save a goal, I saved a goal. Actually, to be totally honest, my thumb saved the goal and was dislocated in the process. So yes, having to use the clicker with the left hand. Hopefully I can manage that. So thank you very much for the wonderful and generous introduction. So I'm Richard Foy. Well, yes, you hear all that, so let me go to the next slide. I think it's fair to say we live in unprecedented times. And I don't know how all you feel, but I feel intensely lucky to be alive at this time in history. As a young man growing up in Wainyamata, I was deeply influenced by stories of science fiction. I was like most kids, I loved Star Wars, but I was really, really taken by Star Trek. In particular, stories by Gene Roddenberry. And he imagined a really positive, optimistic world, humanity moving out into the universe, meeting other intelligences, Asians being allowed to drive the Enterprise. I thought that was quite good. But there was also this aspect of technology being at the forefront in terms of an enabler for the way of life in the future. And a lot of things that we have today, I mean, we live in the future. My iPhone is effectively a Starfleet communicator. Beam me up, Scotty. My iPad is pretty much a tricorder. It's hooked into a universal network. It's got huge amounts of sensors built into it. The police use the modern or contemporary equivalent of the phaser. They call it a taser, but it's a non-lethal device. I don't think we've quite got the equivalent of warp drive yet. So William Gibson's quote there, "The future has already arrived, it's just not evenly distributed." That resonates with me because we're kind of living in the future. And that makes me really sort of think about our work, not just here today in 2014, but actually into the future. To do that, I'm just actually going to give us a bit of a back to the future moment and send us back in time, because I actually just want to go back a little bit before we start talking about the future. So 2010 was a really important year for me. It was a very big year, personally and professionally. It was the year that the iPad was released or announced by Steve Jobs. And that's a pretty big deal. I use my iPad a lot. And I would say that made a huge impact in my life. Not nearly as big an impact, though, however, as the birth of my daughter, Lucy, who was born very soon after, a couple of months after the release of the iPad. And she's really important to me because she makes me think about the work that I do in the context of kids like her. Because it's fair to say that young Lucy, who's now 4, she's only known an experience which is 24/7, 365, instant, always on demand, streaming mobile, hyper-connected. That's the only experience that she's ever going to know. And that's a little bit different to what I grew up with. As I mentioned, a young boy growing up in Wainyamata. When I was in primary school, Bill Gates had a different dream. He was looking at transforming the world, but he was thinking about putting a computer on every desk in every home. We saw from the little video before, over 1 billion installations of Microsoft Office or licenses. I think Gartner said that by 2013 there was going to be about 1.5 billion PCs, probably most of them running Windows XP, but that's by the by. But this was what was happening when I was growing up. And then we lived through, and many of you probably lived through, no doubt, the advent of the World Wide Web through Tim Berners-Lee and that marvelous invention. And then only a few years ago, it was only 2007, as mentioned in that video, that Apple changed that whole paradigm. Not a computer on every desk and every home, but a computer in every hand and every pocket. So Lucy's experience of the world by being born in 2010 AD is very different to what I've grown up with and what you've grown up with. In fact, I'd say it's probably not AD, it's AI, because it's 2010 AI, it's after the iPad, after the iPhone, after the internet and the World Wide Web. She is 100% pure digital native. And for a public servant as myself thinking about public services in the future, she's also 100% pure digital citizen. And that means that over the next 20-odd years, Lucy is going to have a whole bunch of experiences with government, whether she wants to or not, whether she does those directly or indirectly, where she's going to be known to government, she's going to be needing to access services. She's already known to us because she's got an NHI number. She's going to start studying and start sitting examinations, probably NCEA in 2024. By the time she's 16, she's going to want to learn to drive and get a driver's license. Maybe start thinking about higher education, getting a student loan, student allowance, being eligible to drink, to vote, to exercise her civic responsibilities. Start paying taxes, because hopefully she'll start earning her way and get a job. Wanting to travel, need a passport, go overseas, meet someone, fall in love, get married, have children, and that's where the happy story ends for now. So, whether she wants to or not, this is stuff that's going to happen in her life, and we've got to be able to respond to that in the world that makes sense for her. And some of that might be through these kinds of devices, though most likely for someone of her age and her generation, at the tender age of 4, she is much more adept at tapping and swiping and gesturing her way through a touchscreen world than she will ever be using a mouse or a keyboard. And in fact, even out of these two devices, who knows what might come next, because we know things like Google Glass and even virtual reality. But even if we stuck to these two, I'm pretty clear that probably this device will most likely be the predominant viewport that Lucy has into her world, which is a little bit frightening. I don't know about many of you, but I know that my phone, don't know if there's a good admission, is probably the first thing I look at in the morning and probably the last thing I look at night. So, it's pretty clear that Lucy's experience of a digital world and a digital environment will be through some kind of mobile and, wireless disconnected device. That's going to be her access into that digital environment. And for me, leading digital transformation within government and Result 10, I've got to ask myself, what's going to be her experience and her expectation of public services? I'm pretty sure when she's able to use this kind of language, she's going to say to me, Dad, she'll actually say Papa, because she calls me Papa, Papa, WTF, why the fuss involved in all the stuff that I've got to do with government? And what about all these forms that you make me fill in just to get things that I'm entitled to? I'm sure she'll say, I just want to live my life, lol, which means to her, I just want to live my life online. I don't want to have to, jump around to these different channels of service and, call up contact centres, go to meet people in service centres, and then eventually get to access things digitally. I think she's going to expect of me, OMG, that I should somehow organise her government for her and that she doesn't have to do that for herself. And finally, I think she's going to say to me, I just want fast, frictionless service from you, Dad, and from the public service. Can you do that? And it reminds me very much of what Jeff Bezos, who provides a lot of inspiration to us around, what he imagines as great, if not perfect, customer service. And I think I was having a conversation with Jit on similar lines about this just before. That actually perfect customer experience from his point of view is actually no interactions with the customer. So, we have to admit that Amazon, they pioneered the one-click transaction. What about the one-click transaction? But actually it's going to be one swipe or one tap. Or ideally, in our case, no tap, no swipe, no click. So just do it. Do it, because we know stuff about you already. You've given us the power to do it. Just make it happen. So this very much informs the work that we're doing around this thing called Better Public Services Result 10. It's one of the 10 results for New Zealand that New Zealand's government has set out there as part of a wide reform package that is trying to change the way that government operates. New Zealanders can complete their transactions with government easily in a digital environment. It's moving away from this notion that New Zealanders have to line up in queues when and where we tell them in order to get service from us, or that they need to sit on the end of a telephone line listening to some really bad music, waiting for someone to answer them. It's our opportunity to really rethink the way in which we actually deliver those services to New Zealanders to be much more New Zealander-centric, which is why we've got sort of a set of personas that we've kind of initially developed that help us understand that notion that there is no average New Zealander. There are many different types of relationships that people have with government, and that we need to understand them in order to be able to deliver to them. And I think it's recognising that government, unfortunately, is a pretty complex machine. And it's way more complex than it often needs to be. And it's not really something that we need everyday New Zealanders to have to understand. It's not fair. It's not their job to do that. It's our job. So for me, Result 10 and the use of the digital environment is hopefully an opportunity for us to rebalance this kind of very difficult asymmetric relationship that government, big government, has with everyday people, where government holds all the information and all the knowledge and all the power, and the little old New Zealander is just trying to get what they're entitled to. And I do think there is an opportunity to bring good heart to the services that we offer to New Zealanders, and paradoxically, using what is one of the most impersonal technologies in the world, and that's digital technology. It's important because, as I said before, it's not the role of New Zealanders to do that joining up. It's not their job. They don't have those skills. We have to do that from the inside. We have to make the left hand and right hand of government talk to each other so that we don't get into this kind of terrible situation of hundreds, if not thousands of websites where we've scattered information about public services, then made it incredibly difficult for people to actually access their government. And it's about moving New Zealand government and the public service into much more of a unified team, where we work together around delivering integrated services and service experiences that actually make sense for people, that are meaningful to people in the channels that they're already used to working in and at the moments in their lives when it's most useful. So we've kind of encapsulated that in terms of a vision for Result 10. I call this a 3D or digital 3 dimensions. The first dimension is how we think about the customer vision, how we want New Zealanders to be through the work we do. We want to make it so easy for New Zealanders, so easy, that they would choose to use digital services and digital channels from government. That means we need to design the services in the right way, so our service vision is being digital by design, designing very intentionally for that digital environment so that they're actually exploiting the very best that digital channels and devices and media and interactivity can provide. And then at a system level, how to make New Zealand government and the public service itself digital by default. And this comes from the ICT Strategy and Action Plan that the GCIO has put out, but it's actually just going that next step further is what are the capabilities, what's the right thinking and ways of being that government needs to be also digital by choice and digital by design. And that may sometimes mean working with partners. I show an example here of an Air New Zealand site there. But instead of having services of government purely available through government channels, what if we made them open so they could actually be embedded in other channels through other organisations, partners, which are actually maybe more meaningful? So if I'm booking some travel to Shanghai, I might want to check that my passport's going to be valid. I may wish to renew my passport if it's going to be expiring during that time of travel, or apply for a visa, or maybe pay for some fines that are outstanding that are going to stop me from going through SmartGate. And if I can create government as a service, then I might be able to embed government in an app, which may not even be our app. Of course, privacy is a big deal in this world, and we're really attuned to that. I think that privacy is probably one of those really difficult problems that has the potential to be one of the sort of moral panics of our generation if we're not careful, and if we don't think about it very carefully. We know from research and from talking to customers that the internet is still a pretty scary place for a lot of New Zealanders, and it probably will be for quite some time. For those people that say that teenagers and young people don't care about privacy, I'd point you to research by Dana Boyd, one of the researchers from Microsoft, that has studied this over the last 10 years, that debunks those myths. All of you and myself have been teenagers in the past. You do dumb things when you're teenagers, when you're sort of, your frontal lobes are still developing. And, you know, we can imagine that a lot of kids today who are doing things which are a bit silly online are probably going to regret it in about 10 years' time when they find that they can't erase some of that. So research tells us that, yeah, people actually do care about privacy. It's still something that is very much present. Unfortunately, the notions of privacy are getting conflated with aspects of surveillance and tracking and monitoring. And so this whole public conversation about what privacy is and isn't is starting to get quite mixed up. And so, you know, things like, you know, watching what people are doing, intercepting phone calls, phone hacking, that's all kind of stuff that's unfortunately out in the public domain and confusing the public as to what privacy is. Thankfully, we have some really good leadership in this space through the Privacy Commissioner and his team, who are helping us understand, well, you know, what are the real privacy concerns of New Zealanders, and how can we actually work with them to make things good. And that kind of relates to this whole notion of big data. So big data being, you know, hugely important in terms of driving people to the cloud and capability of the cloud, being able to use big data at scale, usually in anonymous ways, in order to make really good decisions and to understand patterns and trends that we couldn't possibly do without it. I'm a big believer in big data. I think it's fantastic. But I'd actually point us in the other direction. And the work that I'm doing in Result 10 and with RealMe is actually the other end of the scale. Not anonymized, not aggregated, but actually very, very, very pinpointed at the individual, what I would call small data. It's this notion that data that is individualized, that's personalized, that's single, that's unique, that's private, that's integrated, and at the very human scale, that surrounds you and connects you to your information and your relationships with organizations, digitally and online, that can be an incredibly powerful and transformative concept. And it's something that is actually behind this thing we call RealMe, which traditionally has been thought of as purely a thing to allow you to log in, or more recently, as a kind of like a digital passport. So there are three parts that are really important to RealMe. And the first two, the lock and key and the passport, are quite important. The bit in the middle in terms of a privacy broker, or what I sort of think of in terms of a privacy curtain, where I can pass information back and forth between them in a trusted way, where the parties can't see anything but what is passed with my consent. That's an incredibly powerful idea that will allow us to bring together information and services from a range of digital service providers to individuals. And it's founded on this notion of having a single unique digital identity, and that is this thing called RealMe ID, or RealMe Verified Account. It's an important thing. It allows us to identify a person uniquely within a population and to ensure that they have one and only one unique digital identity. If we maybe take the thing a little bit too far, this idea that one digital identity that is of high enough strength can be very, very useful and very, very powerful. And I would add that a unique identity is not the same. It is actually not a unique identifier. So we've managed to create something that allows you to prove who you are online, can unify and connect up all your information, but is in no way a unique identifier. So it lives very, very happily within the privacy conditions and constraints and rules that we live in. So with single unique identity, it's not an identifier. We don't get that kind of big brother thing. And so it's this idea of actually thinking about enabling digital transformation, this Result 10 goal, through something that we think of, which is RealMe, much more as a platform which provides an identity-enabled, privacy-protected, consent-based integration of digital information and services from a set of providers on one side to a whole bunch of people on the other side. And in fact, I have a dream that one day Lucy will be able to have that kind of unified, connected experience with government But actually, it doesn't just have to be government service providers. Those digital service providers could be from the private sector. We have banks who currently use RealMe for identity purposes. It would be very straightforward to extend that so that other personal information about an individual could be federated with consent into new services with RealMe. So that's small data. And that's where I really how I wanted to end today, was just sort of talk through, I guess, the big opportunities and the way in which we're seeing the world and the sort of conditions and changes that we need to be thinking about within government when it comes to digital transformation of public services for citizens. And then that idea that, hey, yeah, big data has a place, but actually we're focused on small data. And every agency out there that's actually part of Result 10 and even not part of Result 10 could actually help us on that journey towards small data. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Richard. That was absolutely fabulous. I was reading Richard's LinkedIn profile, as part of the preparation for this, and if you read it, it says he's really good at just making stuff up. And the vision he shared there has real substance, and it was absolutely fantastic to see that. And so, thanks very much for sharing that. I too talked to my kids and said I was MC today, and said I was lacking a bit of material, and so one of them asked me what I needed, and I said I needed a really good joke. So she gave me a joke, and she is only 7, so I thought I would share it for you, and if someone puts their hands up and gets it right, I'll buy them a drink afterwards. So what has a bottom at the top? It's your legs, of course. They're so logical, kids, aren't they? So I'll leave the bad jokes behind. And I'm very dry, sorry, but that's the way it is. I'd like to introduce Ian Napoli. Ian obviously is the director at ISIS Group and has been doing some consulting around town with a lot of the lead agencies, such as NZTA and ACC. He's obviously a consultant and a blogger and likes to comment on the industry and some of the things that are going on. And so we've asked Ian to come along today and share his thoughts about some of the challenges in the digital world. So, welcome, Ian.
Yeah, can you all hear me? Yep, cool. Yes, good, right. Lots of old faces and new faces out there. I think I know half of you. Just by way of background, I've been in ICT for about 23 years, I guess, reasonably infrastructure focused. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've had a particular interest in cloud and then how that changes the way that we interact with the world. So I guess cloud is a disruptive technology. And a disruptive technology is something that comes along and turns the market upside down, breaks all your business rules, and you have to adapt to it pretty quickly. On the blogging side, I would encourage you all to blog. I think that there's a huge amount of value in sitting down, writing what you think, working your way through those processes, getting your staff to do it as well, and just putting it out there. It doesn't mean I'm always right. I definitely have an opinion, and I'm probably going to annoy some people today, but that's okay. What I wanted to talk about was digital government reform. And what Richard's talking about is an excellent vision. But for agencies, it's very difficult, in my experience, to construct yourself and get yourself into a position where you can actually deliver some of that stuff. It's very hard. And doing cloud by itself and implementing cloud, as a lot of you will know, is also difficult. It's a minefield, it's a new technology. There's lots of foibles, there's lots of FUD, and so on and so forth. Government, in general, doesn't help by confusing some of the messages. So an example would be that the DIA mandates certain services that you must use. And we don't like to be told what to do, so that already creates a sort of a negative reaction. And then the DIA in the last few weeks and months is starting to move away from that to guiding what you do. And I think that's a much better way to do things. So they've released a document recently which basically says You can consume whatever cloud services you like, as long as you answer the 170 questions around security and risk and everything else. But that's a change. It's a change from saying you can't do that, you have to do that, to, okay, the horse is bolted, so let's do it safely. Because we know when we survey government that agencies are already, over 75% of you are using cloud services. Every agency I go into is using some kind of cloud service. Most of it's software as a service. Most of it's happening as shadow IT. And what's happening is the business outside of the ICT organisation is effectively signing themselves up to cloud services. And the users are doing the same. They're using Dropbox and everything else. And no matter how many blocks you put on your firewall, they'll continue to do that. So as an ICT organisation, you have to almost adapt to that, make it real, and then figure out how you're going to manage it. So DIA, in my opinion, is starting to move towards a guidance role with a great set of tools. The tools being the IaaS construct, the common capabilities, the other web services, all of that kind of stuff is great. There's another issue inside of government that I see, which is agencies think that an IaaS service or a common capability service will enable them to put all of their ICT services into it. It's sort of the big bang thinking. It won't. At this stage, in my opinion, there's probably about 25% of what you do in terms of common ICT services that can be serviced by a government shared capability. Other capabilities are coming, but you can't just dump everything into one of those services. There's still some risk thinking as well, and the National Cybersecurity people released a paper about 3 or 4 weeks ago that basically kind of damned cloud when you read it. Massive list of risks and all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. So again, we're sort of getting this left-hand, right-hand confusing. One of the things that I talk to people about with risk is, when it comes to risk, you have to understand what the risk is of where you are today and the service you're going to consume. Because I'll almost guarantee that when you start to move to some of those cloud services and common services, you'll get a reduction in risk. They'll have better security, it'll be better monitored, you have the economies of scale, so on and so forth. I think agencies are suffering, or have a whole bunch of challenges. One is that we haven't invested in ICT. Really, in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been this compressing budget on agencies to cut costs 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%. Now, the reality is that when we start to move into some of these services, it may cost more. And that's a challenge that organisations are going to have to try and figure out. One of the upsides of cloud is that you get more transparent billing. So when the CEO says to you, why am I spending $250,000 a year on this thing? You can say that's because that's software as a service, that's what it costs this much per user. Do you want to do that, or do you want us to look at another option? And you're starting to move then also into a broker role. We're doing cloud, but we're not really unlocking some of the benefits yet. So if I look across the agencies, what we know is that there's quite a large proportion now, not quite the majority, that have moved into IaaS, and they're still wrangling with it. And that's going to take some time, because if we move workloads, for example, at a technical level, as they stand today, in an unmanaged way, and we haven't rationalised them, into a cloud server, so it's going to cost us quite a bit of money. But if we think about rationalising those workloads and what makes sense to go into cloud, and evolving that over time, it's a lot better process. My bugbear with cloud is that as government, we've become really, really focused on the iron. We've become really focused on the servers and the disk and the network connections and everything else. What I think we need to do is lift our eyes a wee bit. And I think that's what I quite like about Richard, is he's looking outwards to the edge. And one of the examples which is quite interesting is Estonia, of all places. I can see some of you nodding. So Estonia sat down and said, I want to create a digital society, a few years back. And they just set about doing it. The first thing they did was they got the transport infrastructure right. So they got the telcos right and the broadband and all of that kind of carry on. But basically where they've ended up is they have a population database with a unique ID. 99% of the citizens are inside of that database. They also have an identity card, which allows for digital signing as well. So basically everyone has a unique ID and a card. And this is pretty cool. Citizens can access all of their own data regardless of whatever agency or government group owns it or holds it. 400, basically, different pieces of data in a single spot. And this is how you deal with privacy. You can log in with your ID and you can see which agency, which person has looked at what parts of your file. So it's really transparent. And that's how you kill privacy, by giving citizens the ability to be able to see who's been looking at their stuff. It's simplified, but yeah. And then on the back of that, you can do things like electronic voting. So they call that the digital citizen, and they've done really well out of that. They're a smaller country, about 1 million people, but there's no reason that New Zealand can't start to look at how they did it, because they've made all of that available. It's all open source. The way they planned it, the way they architected it, the way they built it, the issues that they had, the whole thing. So it makes a lot of sense. Just to close, some of the lessons in terms of implementing cloud and kind of extending your business out into cloud providers, the tips that I'd give you would be that you need to listen to your provider. So tell your provider what the business outcome is. If it's saving money, tell them it's saving money and how much. If it's enabling mobility to a certain sector of your workforce, tell them that's what it is. Don't try and architect it yourself. These guys are the experts. You need to understand at an enterprise governance level whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but lifting back up out of that iron again. Make sure you put a project team in place, because projects will always fail unless you have a champion. And it just happens again and again and again. The critical piece of this is service management. And everyone misses it to start with. If you don't have reasonably mature service management, when you move to cloud, it will be unmanageable. And that's because your business is already doing software as a service. You're moving to cloud. You'll probably end up with multiple providers. And when something goes wrong, who are they going to call? And how are you going to manage that? What SLAs do you have with your business? How do you present those services back? So service management is as important as cloud itself. And the last one would be create a beachhead. So work with your provider and tell them you just want a small footprint of cloud, and then give it to your guys or your outsourced providers and say, play with it. I want you to build a file server. I want you to build AD. I want you to move an application in there. I want a sand pit that kind of looks like we do today. And the reason for that is that it will scare out all of the issues, the risks, everything that the particularly operations people do, because your levels of access change and all sorts of stuff changes. So giving people a sand pit is a really cheap way of driving some cultural change and thinking and driving the real risks and issues out inside your ICT organisations. The last thing is evolution, not revolution. Don't think you can do it big bang. Create the beachhead, look at your workloads, understand what makes sense to move to the cloud provider, talk to them about that, and do it in a rolling fashion. And most of the agencies that I've talked to who are now in cloud, or 75% of the way there, are just moving a little bit each week, waiting, making sure it's okay, and going again. I've rambled long enough, I think. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ian. Ian and I were talking before the show, and he sort of said one of the challenges for the night is for everyone to go home and start their blog. So we've all got to take that on board, and I'm looking forward to reading everything in the press tomorrow once it all sort of hits the news from all of the insights that you share about the work that we're doing today. So I'd like to introduce Hayden McKee. So Hayden is is working with Revera and has been instrumental in working through the infrastructure as a service offerings with the All the Government program with Revera since about 2008. And with 16 years in the industry, he's worked with many of the agencies and seen a lot of the challenges and experiences that people have had adopting cloud services. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Hayden's got to say, and welcome, Hayden.
So Hayden McKee, Business Development Manager at Revera. So I've got a few slides, a few salesy slides just to talk about where we're at from the infrastructure as a service perspective, how far it's come. Just to clarify, I guess my 16 years has been in sales. 6 years of that has been at Revera. When I started at Revera, I guess the cloud was in its infancy. We used to front up to a client and explain to them what the cloud was, what infrastructure as a service was, and then attempt to sell it to them. So there was very much an education process that you would go through with your clients. And I guess with the adoption of cloud, it's a lot easier to sell to it, but it's at what layer are you buying the cloud? And I think it's got its challenges in terms of still articulating how to consume these services. So where have we come from? So 2.5 years we've been running infrastructure as a service, and we've signed up 30 agencies thus far. Probably on average we're signing up one every couple of months, with a number of discussions happening as we speak with multiple agencies. 73 racks of co-location, so that's physical kit, and that is growing. So we keep on building more and more data centres across the country. So some of these numbers might be a bit of a surprise to you. So we're up to 16 terabytes of RAM that we're allocating to those agencies. It's a lot of servers. So in those 2.5 years, obviously we're delivering efficiency-based discounts to our clients, to our agencies, as well as volume-based discounts. So as the volume goes up, the price comes down, which unfortunately our CFO doesn't like, but that's the contract that we've signed up for. So since in those 2.5 years, we've had 3 price reductions, and that's equating to 10% discount on your cost of RAM today. 1.9 petabytes of disk we've provisioned. And we've had 2 price reductions on our disk. So there was initial 10%, and we've just hit a further 15% discount. So we've actually built some tools around this because agencies have to write a business case in terms of how they're going to consume these services. And we can show a TCO that if the scenario would be that your storage isn't going to increase, your compute isn't going to increase over time, we can show you based on some basic assumptions around volume and efficiency-based discounts that your cost of IT is actually going to reduce over the next 8 years, which agencies, CFOs certainly like. And often that gets fed into the business cases. So where to next? So we're just developing and we're just investing in some a substantial investment from a Revera perspective. We're calling it the 2.0 All the Government portal. And this is going to take our agencies to that next level. And we're already running it internally within Revera, and the guys are building it as we speak today. So that is going to deliver phenomenal amounts of view into the infrastructure and giving the agencies the ability to burst to the public cloud. So we hope to be able to demo that to our core agencies within Revera and to the wider opportunities as well. So, and then we've got this fantastic platform that we're building, and then the common capability came along, which is a fantastic extension on the efforts that we've done thus far. So Common Web, so the Silverstripe solution, off the top of my head, we've got 30 or 40 agencies that have migrated their website over to the Common Web platform that Silverstripe's running, and that's all hosted on Revera's infrastructure as a service. Enterprise Content Management as a service, that's in its infancy, but it is getting there, and desktop as a service as well. So there's the proud list of agencies, and I guess our catalogue, as most of you all know, it ranges everything from co-location right through to as a service. And every individual agency is purchasing a variety of services, whether it be your Ministry of Justice that said, I don't want to own an asset, and has dived in boots and all, versus other agencies that have gone a more traditional route in terms of the adoption of our services. So that's kind of the salesy stuff. What they wanted me to focus on is what do I see in terms of the learnings that we've had from migrating these 30 agencies in. I can't reiterate enough that leadership is key. The variety of engagements we have with agencies, it's very evident if there is the appropriate amount of leadership coming out of the agency that will enable the agencies to purchase these services. CEO, CFO and CIO, there has to be alignment at that group in terms of the strategy. More often than not, we have a technical person turn up at the door and say, I've been told that I need to purchase your services and I'm going through an evaluation. So more often than not, we try to drag that conversation up into the upper echelons of the agency so that the strategy is determined from the top of the organisation down, not from the bottom of the organisation going up. Because funny enough, that technical person standing there may or may not be incented to move to a cloud-type service. They may feel as though they're threatened personally by their role. Have a very clear sourcing strategy. What is going in your private cloud? What's going in government infrastructure as a service, and what's going into public. So determining where your data sits in terms of where it can sit and what type of cloud. One of the great things we're doing around this Portal 2.0 and that burst to cloud will enable agencies to be able to say, okay, I've got a secure environment in Revera, all of government certified to restricted environment, and I want to take some publicly known data and put it up in Amazon. So the agencies will have that ability to do that from a single pane of glass that Revera is going to deliver to the market. A clear resourcing strategy. So more often than not, the techie turns up and says, I've got the spreadsheet, here's my demand, can you give me a price please? Once again, the strategy hasn't come down from the CEs, from the CXO level in terms of understanding how this is going to change. Fundamentally, a move to a cloud does, or there is potentially some realignment of some roles within the agencies. So having that strategy determined well up front prior to engaging a partner like Revera is key. So once you move to infrastructure as a service, is it going to be an in-house? Is the IT team within the organisation going to deliver the service, or are you going to go to a managed service, an ITMS type construct? And there's a change in those key roles. What is that going to look like going forward? And we see some ministries, some agencies do that particularly well, and some do that relatively poorly. And that impacts on the speed at which the agency can adopt these types of services. And a very clear evaluation criteria. Once again, it's always top down. If you've got the techie at the bottom coming up with the evaluation criteria, potentially they may or may not evaluate it with an apples and apples approach. We see that often as well. So ensure that there's independence from IT. So IT needs to be involved without a doubt, but they're feeding information into the strategy and into the decision making, and make sure they understand cloud and the benefits of this as well. Just want to talk here in terms of obviously the separation of responsibilities. You're on premise, who does what? Infrastructure as a service, the demarcation points coming up further. Obviously from an infrastructure perspective where our demarcation is the hypervisor. Platform as a service is going up further again, and then software as a service, everyone's managing it. What I wanted, I've just stolen a slide here from won't disclose the agency, but it's a large council north of the Bombay Hills. And what they're going through is a phenomenal change within the organisation, and not a lot of people appreciate what they're doing, and the migration that they're obviously bringing their workload over to Revera. So on your left, you've got the historical in-house IT environment. So the they're looking at their sourcing strategy very carefully. Okay, well, I need these types of people for a set period of time until I end up in Revera's infrastructure as a service. And then in the middle, this is what I need in the interim. And this is the process that I need to go through in terms of moving to the cloud. And then on the far right-hand side, these are the new types of roles that I need when I'm in the cloud. I always say to agencies, hey, my service is a dripping tap. You can turn it on full bore, but I'll never turn it off. I'll keep invoicing you for that infrastructure as long as you've got the tap running. The beauty about it is that the tap can be turned off, and it's the intelligent agencies that understand that and manipulate my invoice on a monthly basis that get the true value out of our service. So this is one agency that we're engaging with that is doing a very good job about the strategy comes down from the top. They understand what they're going to do at a resourcing level. They're articulating that very well to their staff, so the staff understand, well, this is what it's going to look like. I'm on the left-hand side, or left-hand side here. I want to move to the right. What type of skills do I need to move up the value chain in my organisation and still work for this agency? So ensure advice is coming from the right place. I think there was a discussion here about why has the business gone out and purchased services in the cloud. What ultimately does the business want? Why has the business been doing that? Because IT's been saying, no, it's too hard, and so businesses just get out their credit card, they're off to Amazon, they'll swipe the credit card and they're buying virtual servers. So the business is doing that because IT has been holding them back from being able to deliver fast and efficiently, and that's ultimately what these services can deliver. That's why the cloud's there. See this as well, technical indulgence. People are still looking under the hood. What type of SAD are you running there, Hayden? How many IOPS can it deliver? So they're still dragging the conversation down into the weeds instead of just understanding, okay, what is the service? My service is an outcome. It's Exchange. It's the platform. So that's where the conversation has to be. And there's a huge opportunity for consultants around town in Wellington, and the consultants are making a lot of money, and they're rolling in and saying, I can help you move to the cloud, and so they're writing all these strategies, but more often than not, the consultants aren't aligned with the business. They're coming from the old view of IT and trying to reinvent themselves and move themselves into a new service called Journey to the Cloud. Set up an appropriate governance structure. As I said, I'll turn the tap on and the tap will never be turned off unless you want me to. So all new requests, and we're seeing this in terms of some lessons learned, all new requests need to go through standard processes. Historically, the IT department said, I need a new server. So that goes through an internal process in terms of the DFA on the sign-off of that server. Typically, it'll take 6 to 8 weeks for the server to turn up if it actually does. In my world, I need to deliver you a new virtual server within 4 hours. So that server can be turned on very, very quickly, which is fantastic for the business, but you need to make sure that the DFA is in place and the process is in place. Now, the process doesn't need to change within the agency, but ultimately the result is instead of calling a hardware vendor, you're dialing onto our portal and just spinning up a virtual server. So it can happen a lot quicker, but your invoice can balloon very quickly. So you need the processes in place. Once again, we're seeing it done very well in some ministries. Other ministries, it's like the Wild West. Because it's easy for dollars to increase. The CFO likes that, but the ministry's CFO doesn't particularly like that either. And that's when they come talk to me and say, well, what's your governance structure? Who is controlling the purchase of these servers? Co-location. So as I said on my first slide, I think we've got 80 racks of co-location. We're building another data centre out at Trenton because we've got more and more co-location. Someone was calling me the co-location king at one stage. Co-location will ultimately just increase your costs. Why? Because you've already got a computer room next door, you've already got your infrastructure sitting somewhere, and it's a sunk cost. You've bought the air conditioning, you've bought the assets that's going to run your computer room. My data centre is at a higher tier than yours. I've got far more redundancy than what you've got today, and that comes at a higher cost. So you lift and shift your infrastructure into our data centre, your costs are going to go up. Now that's going to be an interesting business case, pushing that upstairs. Fundamentally, co-location will just increase your costs. And it's seen as moving the issue, not dealing with it. So more often than not, when an agency turns up and says, I want 10 racks of co-location, it's the techie guy that's turned up saying, I want to protect my job, that's why I want 10 racks of co-location. I'm going, where's the strategy coming from your CE? Where's the business? Because all you're going to do is move your problems into our data centre. Nothing's going to change. And fundamentally, the business is still going to be sitting there going, where's my efficient service from the cloud? Well, I've moved it to the cloud. It's out in Trentham. Well, it's not really the cloud. All you've done is just change the location of your physical servers. And it's not strategic. All you're doing is musical chairs. You're just starting to pay me to power and water and feed your boxes. It's not strategic at all. Transition. So we always have that discussion with the agencies. Okay, where are your maintenance renewals at? Where's your hardware? Where's your software? Where's your data centre environmentals? Those are the decision points in terms of how quickly you're going to adopt these types of services. Liquidate it. So, I certainly with our new owners, there's a reasonable sized checkbook floating around. So we have purchased assets off agencies and liquidated their assets and brought them in. So they've just the big bang approach straight into as a service. Or mixed is, have you got half of your infrastructure that still needs to be suited? So we'll co-locate that for 2 years until that comes up for renewal, and then we'll move it over to infrastructure as a service. And I guess this is our experience. Our technical guys, 30 agencies we've moved in. Are you going to P2V it, V2V it, or lift and shift or over the wire? So what is your migration strategy? Our technical guys, they have literally dealt with everything. Sometimes we do have the old ministry turn up and say, hey, we're running business critical systems for New Zealand, you can't muck this up. And saying, well, last week we just moved the 111 system into our data centre. So I think that's pretty business critical. So if you think your application's more critical than 111, then let's have that discussion. So we have a phenomenal amount of experience in terms of transitioning them, and it is a lessons learned in terms of giving the agency confidence that these services can be done. So I'm wrapping up. This is my last slide. So over 2 years, the catalogue has changed. So I think we're up to working on version 8 of our service catalogue today. So tier 0. So at the moment, there's 3 tiers of disk. We're putting a tier 0 in, so literally an SSD type service. Agencies will be able to purchase that. We're going to tier 4. We're challenging the guys. We've got national libraries that are saying, I've got all this data. I've got 2 petabytes of data sitting on VHS in their basement, and this is like New Zealand's historical data. And so they're asking for a cold storage. They want to buy, National Library want to buy a gigabyte of storage at a cent a gig. Great. Talk to my technical guys saying, guys, I've got a demand, 2 petabytes of disk. Yeah, they only want to pay a cent a gig for it, but they can get it on Amazon so they can do it, so why can't we do it? And so that's the challenge for them. And these are the services that we want to deliver to government by expanding our service. Nebrick is a service, so NAS is a service. So we'll deliver you storage straight to your network. So we've added that as well. Spark is a service. There's about 6 agencies around town that have invested heavily in Oracle technology, in the Spark technology. So we brought that to the market. No one in New Zealand is delivering a Spark LDOM as a service. And those agencies now have a platform to migrate onto, with more to come. So as I said, the Portal 2.0 is going to be our stretch for all of government to private clouds. So whether it's going into Amazon, Azure, you name it, we're going to be able to stretch those networks into those clouds. And we're calling ourselves a public aggregation, a public facilitator of cloud. But ultimately, with those fiscal control panels and proactive controls, so that you haven't got the business going out with their credit card and swiping and buying some virtual servers on their corporate credit card. It can be controlled and ensured that that DFA is appropriately getting signed off. for me. Thank you.
So we've had Richard share the vision for government around digital transformation. Ian shared with us some of the challenges and the things to think about, down to the process layer and what do we need to do when we're out there thinking about adopting cloud. And Hayden shared with us some of the things that are actually happening out there as well. So between us, we've got lots of collective experience. We've had our speakers share their thoughts, and what we're attempting to do today was to spark a conversation around that. And I suppose we'd really like you to stay behind and have a drink and talk about some of the things that we've talked about today. So I personally would like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to introduce Robin Cockayne, the CEO of Revera, to close our session. So welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Matt. I haven't got one of those Madonna things, unfortunately, so I have to stand behind this thing. I found that quite provoking in many ways. I think we've had three really good perspectives there. We've had some information from those who are leading the vision and setting the bar high and showing there's a demand coming over the hill that we can't quite deliver today. So we're going to have to change, and we're going to have to change quick, and we're going to have to change in the right direction pretty early and learn the lessons as quickly as we can. We've had some good thought-provoking commentary from Ian from an objective side, standing on the sidelines watching the CSPs or the IWS panel providers like the Reveras, the Genis and every other man and the dog out there engaging with the government and the agencies who have been given this vision. And I thought that was quite insightful. There was some damn good advice there. And then there's Hayden, who's provided some stories from the coalface. He's bared his scars and shown his wares to a certain degree, and hopefully not too much for you to feel a bit sick. Either way, I thought that was a well-rounded set of informations and insights, and I wanted just to talk to two brief comments on this before we round up and allow the beer cabinet to open up. Two bits of advice from inside the vortex of what cloud is, and 99% of my week is in cloud in some way, shape or form. I'm either fighting in the corner of cloud or I'm fighting against it. I'm either talking about transactions that are heading towards cloud or not. Watching organizations go through it and grapple with the changes it presents to them. And watching ourselves as an entity evolve and adapt to the market and the environment that we're operating within. I guess the first piece of advice is to, as Ian touched on, know why you're doing it. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, we sure as hell don't. And the hard bit around that is making sure that that value proposition that you're looking for out of your cloud, be it much more advanced fiscal control, security, risk management. You may be looking for some degree of growth in a new market, or you may be looking to simply squeeze and become more efficient. Or simply you're looking for simplifying the complex, or what's being traditionally very complex. Whatever that value proposition is for you as an entity and the job you've been given to do, try and keep it front and center all the time. It's difficult to do. Your rat race will overtake that very, very easily, and you'll lose sight of why you even started this. And Hayden touched on that with his leadership comment as well. But it's an extremely important thing to do. The other side of it is about that journey. Cloud isn't an A to B. It's a journey, and you guys aren't the only ones on the journey that are going to have to deliver Result Sector 10's vision. It's a journey for the guys that are delivering these services as well. We're evolving as much as we can evolve. It's our job to stay relevant and to deliver value to you guys and to support that journey. And some of those changes have caught some of the early adopters on the hop a little bit. It isn't just about watching the T in ICT slowly fade into the cloud. You're going to have to change your organization formats, the roles within it, the skill sets you have today will probably be irrelevant in some degree in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. Your behaviors will have to change. your fiscal controls will absolutely have to change, and it's that stuff, that service management aspect, as well as some of that governance responsibility, which is kind of your job to do. We can provide some tools to help that happen, but that's still your responsibility, and that's becoming the function, as you're the custodians of New Zealand's data. That's the function you have to look after and become that information management custodian in a much fuller way, and without the T so much at the fore. I thought that was really provoking. Hayden's blown the secret around Portal 2.0, although he did get the name wrong, so we're undercover to a certain degree still. Another challenge for marketing. So thank you for coming today. A big thank you for those who have organised this event. I know what the logistics for these things feels like when you're running up to kick-off, so thank you for those who have contributed. Thank you for you guys for turning up. It's an evening that, or the beginning of an evening that you've contributed by simply being here and hopefully engaging in some conversation, and hopefully you will take something away from this. If not, certainly help yourself to a beer and make it worthwhile. Thank you to our speaker, Richard. It was extremely inspirational in his portrayal of the government journey. Thank you, Matt, for emceeing. And get stuck into some of the demos on the side as well. We've got some capabilities here which are easy to look at in 30 seconds and just get a quick glimpse of something that might be of use to you. And with that, I'll wrap things up and we'll call it a day. Thank you.